The destiny of the soldier who pierced Jesus on the cross. What happened after? It was a gray afternoon in Jerusalem, the sky heavy with a sense of impending doom, though the people had no idea that this day would change the fate of many. The silence that surrounded Jesus' crucifixion was deep, as though the entire universe was holding its breath. Yet not everyone in the crowd felt the same weight in their hearts. Among the shadows of the Roman ruins surrounding Golgotha, a Roman soldier named Aelius stood, indifferent, awaiting the end of what had begun as just another workday. Crucifixions were no spectacle to him anymore. They were a part of the routine. Jesus, a man condemned by the empire, hung from the cross, his eyes half closed, struggling for breath, while the crowd around him fluctuated between mocking and mourning. Aelius, with his gleaming armor and spear, was part of the guard overseeing the execution. He had witnessed many deaths before, but there was something unsettling about this one. It wasn't the tortured figure of Jesus or the jeers from the onlookers that disturbed him. It was a strange emptiness that seemed to fill his chest as he watched the scene unfold. He felt that something monumental was about to happen, something far greater than any order he had ever been given. Still, his duty was clear. He was to ensure that Jesus died. The crowd murmured, some insulted Jesus, others wept. But Aelius paid no attention to their voices. His gaze was fixed on the body suspended from the cross. He recalled the whispers that had reached his ears, rumors among his comrades about the nature of this man, this King of the Jews. But those rumors didn't matter to him. He was a soldier, and his only allegiance was to the empire. When Jesus' suffering seemed to reach its peak, the centurion gave the order. Aelius mechanically raised his spear and with brutal force drove it into Jesus' side. The blow was so precise that blood poured out like a river, and Aelius felt the warmth of the wound travel down the shaft of the spear. Jesus' body convulsed, and an indescribable sensation surged through Aelius's arm as though destiny itself had passed from one life to another. In that moment, something inside Aelius changed. The rage and detachment that had always defined him began to dissipate. The vacant look in Jesus' eyes pierced him like an invisible arrow. In those eyes, there was no hate, no vengeance, only a deep peace, an absolute acceptance. Aelius, who had only moments ago thought of fulfilling his duty, could not shake the feeling that those eyes were familiar to him, as though they reflected something much greater than just a man on a cross. The days that followed were strange for Aelius. His mind kept returning to the image of Jesus on the cross, to the blood he had spilled, to the wound he had caused. For weeks, the soldier felt unsettled. The anger he once held in his heart had vanished, replaced by an inexplicable emptiness. He no longer found solace in the noise and violence that surrounded him. When he looked at his fellow soldiers, he no longer saw men like himself, but puppets of an empire that didn't understand the true nature of life and death. One night, while Aelius was patrolling the walls of Jerusalem, a strange vision reached him. In the dark, he saw a figure, like a shadow walking among the ruins of the temple. He approached cautiously, sword in hand, but when the figure turned to face him, he saw the same eyes he had once gazed into, eyes that had belonged to Jesus. The figure was a man, yet his face was not defined. He was merely a presence. "Why did you make me do this?" Aelius asked, his voice trembling. The figure did not respond with words, but Aelius felt a power greater than anything he had ever experienced. It was as though the wind itself whispered a forgotten truth. The fate of the man on the cross had not been an end, but the beginning of something much larger. Jesus had been a sign, a manifestation of human suffering, and Aelius had been an instrument in that story. He awoke from his trance with a mixture of fear and revelation. His heart was heavy with a guilt that pressed down on him like an anvil. He could no longer ignore what he had done. He could no longer be the same man. Years passed, and Aelius wandered through the lands of the empire, searching for redemption for his crime. In every city, every town, he encountered people speaking of the man crucified, of his resurrection, of the hope he had brought to broken hearts. Aelius, once the executioner, now found himself among those who worshiped Jesus. One afternoon, after crossing the desert and arriving in a small Christian community, Aelius came face to face with an old man who looked at him intently. He was wise, his wrinkles and eyes gleaming with the wisdom of ages. When Aelius confessed his sin, The old man looked at him and said, "Your fate is not sealed by the act you committed, but by what you do with it. The blood you spilled has fallen upon you, but it has also given you the chance to see beyond your eyes. Seek peace, and you will redeem your soul." Elias understood. It wasn't about running from his past, but embracing it, accepting that the man he had pierced was more than just a man, that his sacrifice had an eternal purpose. From that moment on, Elias dedicated his life to helping others, healing the wounds he had caused, both physical and emotional. His hands, once responsible for a brutal death, became the same hands that healed and comforted. His destiny had been altered in an instant, and over time, Elias became known as the soldier who pierced Jesus on the cross. But instead of being remembered for his act of violence, his name became associated with the story of his transformation, how he went from a man filled with rage to a servant of peace. His fate was not that of a man forever marked by his crime, but that of someone who, by the grace of the one who hung on the cross, found the true meaning of redemption. And so Elias lived out the rest of his days, knowing that sometimes destiny is not defined by what happens to us, but by what we do with what happens to us. Years passed, but the weight of that fateful moment in Jerusalem never fully left Elias. Though he dedicated his life to helping others, healing the wounded and comforting the broken, he could not escape the memory of the blood he had spilled. Despite his good deeds, guilt still clung to him, and he wondered if anyone could ever truly forgive him for what he had done. One evening, as Elias knelt beside a river, lost in prayer, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Jesus, though not in flesh, but in a presence that radiated peace and power. The same eyes that had once pierced his soul met his again, and Elias fell to his knees, trembling. "Why do you continue to seek me?" Jesus' voice echoed softly. "I thought I could never be forgiven," Elias said, voice breaking. "I killed you. How can I ever find peace with what I did?" Jesus stepped forward, reaching out a hand. "You were not the only one who pierced me. All of humanity has pierced my heart with their sins. But I came to offer forgiveness to all, even you. The blood you spilled was mine to give. It was not the end, but the beginning of something new, a way for all to find redemption." Elias struggled to comprehend it, but in his heart, a profound peace began to take root. Jesus' death had not been just for the righteous, but for all who would accept it, even the worst of sinners. Elias realized that his past no longer had to define him. "Go," Jesus said as he began to fade away. "Share my love with the world. You are not just the soldier who pierced me, but the man I have called to share peace and redemption." From that moment on, Elias no longer saw himself as the executioner, but as a messenger of mercy. He traveled, preaching the gospel of forgiveness, healing the sick, and comforting the brokenhearted. His name became known not for his violence, but for the grace he had received and the grace he shared. On his final day, as he lay surrounded by those he had helped, Elias knew his journey was complete. The man who had pierced Jesus on the cross had been transformed. He had embraced the love and forgiveness that flowed from the Savior, and in doing so, had rewritten his own destiny. And as he passed from this world, he understood. Sometimes it is through our deepest wounds that we find true healing.